You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Brendan, as we record, no update on Pro Tour number 3, but we do have an ELO update. Now, you went undefeated at the World Championships in 2022 after declaring that you would not lose a game on stream for the rest of the year, and you didn't. So, well, actually, that's not true because you did play the Goliath Gauntlet and lose. But anyway, I digress. ELO update has happened, but no impact for Pro Tour 3 yet. What happened to your ELO after going undefeated? You must have really skyrocketed.
Yeah, I'm actually in a different bracket now. You'll probably get there eventually. You know, ELO update's great, but when are we going to get some details on this Pro Tour? A lot of people listening to this probably know, but Legendary Studios, they probably weren't advised correctly, but they did tweet that the Pro Tour information was coming soon. So an announcement about announcement, but we have not heard anything about Pro Tour number 3, which I know is a bit of a pain point for people considering that we were getting close to what we would suspect the date would be.
Well, ProQuest also start this weekend, so...
Yep.
But actually, you know what, LSS are famous for making us look silly. We always talk about, no announcement, or we start speculating about stuff. We've done this before. We speculated about, I believe it was Uprising, and then we released the pod, and between us recording and releasing the pod, LSS went and put out a bunch of information about Uprising and made us look silly. So maybe we will it into existence. I actually think by the time the pod drops, we will probably have an announcement on Pro Tour 3, confirmed date and location. Looks like it might happen this week because we got that tweet. So we'll see what happens. Anyway,
yeah.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 92 of Arsenal Pass. Of course, Brendan Patrick there, Hayden Dale here, and we are back talking about ProQuest decks to play for this ProQuest season. Kicks off this coming weekend. As the time the pod drops, you are somewhere between 24 to 48 hours away from playing your first ProQuest, potentially, if you have ProQuest on this weekend. Maybe you're not to week 2 or week 3. And last week we talked about Icelander. We went deep on one of the best decks in the format, talking about what we consider strengths and weaknesses of that hero, things to consider if you want to pick it up for ProQuest, maybe if you're looking to how to beat it for ProQuest. We also talked a lot about that with Icelander. And this week, Brendan, we're going to fight ice with some fire. We're going to talk Fi. I think Fi, Icelander, obviously 2 of the most recently released heroes in Flesh and Blood, pretty dominant and pretty, they've really shaped the format over the last 6 months since Uprising's release, which we'll talk more about how Fire's done that, of course. But, what's kind of your top level take on Fire right now? Is this one of the best decks in the format? Or best
Yes.
hero?
That's the highest level take of it. After that, I think that it's just a pretty well-rounded aggro deck. Very, very consistent in terms of what it's trying to execute game to game. It also is somewhat resistant, or more resistant than some other aggro decks, to fatigue and the ice strategies, because it usually packs Belittle Minnowism, which is it's a big deal, to be honest. Because I think if you're looking at ProQuest weekend 1 or weekend 2, you're probably expecting to see a lot of Icelander and a lot of Oldhim, both ice decks, right? And maybe a bit of Ice Lexi. So things like Briar that can fold to that kind of disruption and that kind of tax. Yeah, I don't know. I think Fi looks like a better pick if I was looking to pick up an aggro deck for weekend 1.
Well, that is episode 92 of Arsenal Pass. Thank you for listening. That is all our insight on Fi. Brendan's nailed it in a succinct paragraph right there. No, I mean, very true. All those things are exactly what Fi does, and we're going to dive more into that, talk about some of the deck lists. There's some differences in the way people are playing Fi, which I think is great as well. So before that, Brendan, you're weak in Flesh and Blood. I've heard a little rumor that maybe you've actually played some Flesh and Blood in the past week. You took your hiatus post sort of... I know actually you played some during November, December a little bit, but took a bit of a hiatus, and maybe you're back this week.
I have a little bit of a bone to pick with myself, which is there's a massive spread across people in terms of how this affects them, and I'm on like the far bottom of the spectrum. And that is, if I take a break from a game, if I pick it up again, I suck ass. Like, I am terrible. It's crazy. And Hayden, I think that you're on the other side of the spectrum, which is why this is so funny. But I am so freaking bad. Like, it takes me a good 5 to 10 games to, I'll increase my level of play by like 300% in that first 5 to 10 games. I need to get back into the groove of it, and yeah, just not be overwhelmed and actually be thinking through like what I'm doing rather than just kind of doing it. I don't know what it is, Hayden, but every single game I've ever played, if I take a break, I'm screwed. I'm terrible.
I don't think I've ever really taken a break from Flesh and Blood. Maybe that's my problem. Maybe that's why I have. I think I get what you're saying. Like a lot of the natural sort of mechanical play and stuff, and especially maybe decks you're familiar with, some of those lines the rust accumulates, right? Although I would think though, if you went and picked up Kano and Blitz, I feel like I get what you're saying though. The first 5-6 games, you might just make silly mistakes you would never make while you're actively playing. I think is kind of what it looks like, and you go like, why did I just do that?
Yeah, the key trap is just low value plays, right? Like you'll see a shiny card in your hand, like a Hypothermia, like an Aether Ice Fiend, and you don't take the higher value line, which is just like actually not playing that card and maybe blocking and things like that. Like you'll take more damage than you need to. It's just a weird thing that happens, and I feel like I'm sort of affected by it much more than other people because I am legitimately terrible. Like it is despicable.
Well, you get super punished with a deck like Icelander for doing that as well, if that's what you're picking up for ProQuest as well. You know, if you picked up maybe something like Briar back post, you know, haven't played it since PT2 or around there, you know, and you picked it back up, I think you can get a little bit less punished because focusing on those higher value cards as opposed to higher value play can actually reap a lot of rewards and maybe not put you in as awkward a position. But yeah, well, good to see that you're back playing some Flesh and Blood. Heard you had a bit of testing the other night. You've been playing some Talishar.
Yeah. Talishar. Yeah, Talishar's great, of course, as always. But I just have a lot of success on Talishar. And then I had a friend come over last night. He wasn't playing the decks I've seen on Talishar against me. He was mostly playing Oldhim and Dash into my Icelander deck. And, you know, I lost a couple games versus Oldhim, it's a losable matchup for sure. But I felt like I thought I'd be more comfortable into it, so I was surprised. And then the Dash matchup was just like it was kind of a beating, to be honest. Like Dash and Icelander, Hayden, you and I were talking about this before we hopped on the pod, but the reason why it's tough for Icelander is Icelander has like these cards that are extremely good against aggro decks, right? Like Hypothermia, Blizzard, CLF. CLF is still good, but the Hypothermia is just, you can't take like a low value play to place a Hypothermia in your arsenal hoping to just totally shut down a Dash's turn. Like it can happen, but then what can also happen is you put that in your arsenal, Dash goes to play and they play Throttle for 8 off of a Tech Load Pounder, or they play High Octane. You're like, wow, okay, I have a dead arsenal, and like it's rough. So the Dash deck does seem pretty good into Icelander, which is PSA. As a Icelander in your meta.
Yeah, play pattern thing. We talked about it last week and we said it was pretty close. We actually, I think after that we recorded a game. We played a game of Icelander and Dash. I've played a few more games. You've played a few more games. I think just addendum to that a little bit. I do want to make a quick addendum to last week's episode as well, when we talked through the history of Icelander. One of the things we didn't talk about, Brendan, was actually top 8 Singapore was, I think, Icelander's first kind of big breakout when Punkage took that, Ethnic Smoke took that to top 8 at the Singapore calling. Anyway, just thought I'd shout that out because Ethnic Smoke's a cool guy. Makes funny videos. Have you seen the Star of the Show video?
I haven't.
Oh, you should go check that out. Yeah, you should go check that out. My last week in Flesh and Blood, I have been doing a bit of testing. Me and Dan, and as well as editor Dave, we've been playing a bit of Flesh and Blood, trying to work out what to play for ProQuest this weekend. And we have Auckland Calling coming up in February, so not too far away. It's going to creep up pretty quickly. So getting in some games of testing. Got to play a game with Brendan on Friday as well. Brendan, you look confused.
No, it's just like whoop my ass in that game. But I was just wondering, what's your limited rank and what's your constructed rank? This is relevant just because I'm going to ask you, like, if you can play ProQuest, right? Because you can suspect or sort of theorize that you're locked, right, for the Pro Tour. So
I want to say something first before I answer the question about where my ranks are, because I think that if you want to play Flesh and Blood, and if you're trying to protect rating, I'm not sure that is the right approach, because we don't even know if Elo is going to qualify yet. So we should find out. We should find out before this weekend. I just want to point that out. But it is reasonable. You know, if you are say they release it today and they say, okay, top 50 constructed and limited, and you're sitting 30th in constructed, and you know you could just miss ProQuest if that's what you want to do, and that is what the Elo system has been to enable people to do, right? Is allow you to perform high level events and then get rewarded for that. So I'm sitting, after the updates, I'm 6th in limited. and I think I'm like bang on 100 or like 90 something in constructed. So, I to be honest, even if I was around the cusp of, and they said, okay, only top 50 constructed get in, and nothing to do with limited because it's constructed only PT, let's say, and I was like 41st or something, and I had like a, I would play, I think, or maybe I was 30th or something, or 20th. I think I would play because I have the luxury of other avenues to invites, such as PTIs. But yeah, I can see if you're let's say they do top 15, you're sitting around like 20 to 30. I can see people opting to sit out ProQuest, which to be honest, there's these events are to help people qualify for the Pro Tour, and if you're in a position where you can already grab your invitation, take the downtime, do a bit of testing, play some events if you want to. I don't know, maybe you're a level 1 judge, go and judge the event, help out your community, whatever it might be. Enjoy. Yeah, I mean, we can jump to some news from there. I mean, top of the list I was going to say is we have had this ELO update. I'm pretty happy with sitting 6th in Limited now. Limited is my favorite format.
Of course it is. You're ranked 6th.
You always know drafts to be my favorite format. I did 6-0 draft at Worlds, which does help. I also 5-1 draft at Nationals, I think. Yeah, 5-1.
This freaking guy is just like, he finishes Worlds. He's like, Uprise is a pretty good format, but I don't know what people are talking about. It's like, yeah, dude, of course.
You can go back and listen to previous episodes where I've talked about how much I think Uprising is better than people say, but, that's fine. I'm not going to do the old, like, hey, it's a skill-based format. Look at, like, it's not about that. But I'm looking forward to some Outsiders Limited. I was on the Instant Speed podcast earlier today talking to Flake, and I said, just want to draft some Outsiders. Like, that is, I think this, not only does this need to be a good limited set, I think, but I just so badly want it to be a great limited set from LSS.
Yes, please introduce archetypes back to draft.
Please. Well, it sounds like from all the things they've released so far and little bits and pieces they've dropped through with 4 heroes and the kind of the heroes that we may or may not get, and we know we're getting assassin. It sounds like we might be heading back towards some of the things that worked really well in Welcome to Wraith and even Monarch Limited, to be honest. So
yeah.
PT news, like we say, nothing at the time of recording. I think LSS is going to make us look silly though, and there'll be something by the time this pod drops. Otherwise, we've had a few things go up on the YouTube channel. Brendan actually just recorded a deck tech this morning. I think you can say who it's with now because it's going to go up probably in the next week or so.
Yes, it's with Flesh and Blood Prodigy Brody Spurlock. Burst onto the scene in 2022, crushing Battle Hardens. Good performance at US Nationals. And honestly, he's super high ranked too, I think, as well. So he's just been very consistent overall. Yes. He's a local to mine. So actually I've known him kind of before the last year sprint. And dude is an absolute freaking grinder. I mean, I think he actually might be number 1 on the AXP, like beating out some of the people. Yeah, beating out some of the people in Hong Kong and Singapore, which is crazy. Dude is an absolute grinder, loves the game, and a fantastic player. Has beat me in a lot of local tournaments now. Unfortunately, I got a big dog to beat for these ProQuest and these Battle Hardens in Dallas.
Yeah, you got an M-Boss. So that is. I think you can say it's a Briar deck tech, right? And that is coming out. Yep. Probably by the time this pod goes up, it'll be before week 2 of ProQuest kicks off, definitely. So make sure to check that out. We've also had the Kano guide is up there that we did. There is also a dash deck tech that I did that's up there as well. And we last week as well a video just going over some of the top decks that I personally recommend. Brendan didn't have a say in this, so he might disagree with the decks that I recommend because Bravo is on the list, so Brendan might disagree. But I went through some of the decks that I recommend for this ProQuest season, why I think people should play them, why they shouldn't, depending on their meta, things like that, and your experience with them. So they're all up there with deck lists, etc. And actually on Patreon this week, I'm throwing up a bit of an extra sort of piece to that where I go through a couple of those deck lists that are my own deck lists that I've been using and testing and talking through sideboard options and just how I would approach those decks going into ProQuest. So you can grab that. On that as well, Brendan, if people want to join Patreon this month, everyone who joins our base tier, which is our $4 tier, gets access to all of our content for January. So tiers, you don't need to join our Patreon at a higher tier. If you join at the lowest tier, you'll get all of the Patreon content regardless of the tier this month only. So a bit of a, January, say thank you to our amazing community. And if you've ever wondered what it is that we kind of do with these deck guides and deck techs, they are available at that cheaper tier.
And I'll also tell you too, just in case people don't know, if we do deck techs on the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel, On the Patreon, we do an additional sideboard guide, as well as like tips and tricks, like heuristics and things like that. Just little bullet points, like things you need to keep in mind for each matchup. So if you do like the deck techs and you want to sort of level up your game and just get the full package and maybe be able to plug and play the deck and just pick it up in a ProQuest, then the Patreon additional piece is going to help you. If not, the deck list is public on YouTube. Just pick it up there, try it out, and yeah, that's kind of the main pull of the Arsenal Pass Patreon. So if you're able to check it out this month while that lower tier gets access, I highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm. And we did film a gameplay, and it is going up. Actually, it'll be up by the time this drops, or around this time. We played a game, Icelander versus Dash, a matchup I think we're going to see quite a bit during this ProQuest season. It was, a testing-like game between myself and Brendan, a bit of banter. I know people have been asking for more gameplay. We try and record it when we can. We've had some logistical challenges plus time zone challenges, but we've finally got a gameplay going out for you. So, go check it out. Give us throw us your support behind it. Give us a like and a little comment. Let us know what you thought about the game, Brendan.
Yeah.
All right. I don't have anything else for the news this week. I think we're going to have a lot more as we get into this ProQuest season. I'm sure once we get into ProQuest season, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening with the meta and stuff as well. And Alice will have some stuff for us. But anything else, Brendan?
No, I was just going to say, while you're moseying around that YouTube channel, why don't you just go ahead and karate chop that freaking subscribe button while you're there. We're thinking, we at 5K now, or are we at 4K?
We're at 4.3K. 5.3K, sorry.
Soon to be 5K.
Soon to be 5.5K. Yeah.
One of these days we're going to get better at the whole YouTuber content creator thing and actually telling people to subscribe and stuff. I feel like we're just a bunch of boomers that talk into microphones. Hit that subscribe.
I've been doing it a little bit more on the gameplay, the deck tech videos, but it's not necessarily something that comes naturally. Anyway, I digress. Do you smell what the comment section is cooking? I don't know. I couldn't think of anything in time. Damn.
That's pretty good. I like that.
All right, come on, Cookout, Brendan. We have a question this week from the Patreon Discord from Dr. Unks, Drunks himself, who asks, for play testing for a tournament, is it helpful to play games against yourself where you play both sides of a matchup you want to prepare for? Or would goldfishing, that's what Drunks has put that in, Dr. Unks has put that in quotation marks, goldfishing, that's what people will call playing against yourself, playing both sides of a matchup. Goldfishing and working on lines of play with your deck be better? This is assuming the person does not want to play online. So I think, great question. I think this question is really poignant as we head into ProQuest season. People are obviously testing, trying to get as many reps and trying to get whatever they can. And as Dr. Dunk says, maybe Talishar is not for everyone. Maybe you can't get to the local game store. Maybe you don't have someone who can test at a certain time. Maybe you have 15 minutes between work calls or lectures or whatever it is. You've got your lunch break. Is it worth playing games against yourself and goldfishing? And I'm just going to start and just say the answer is yes, Brendan. Like, it's just emphatically yes. Everyone
who's good at Kato in the world learn that deck doing that. No, seriously. It's super. Well, he did say goldfishing or playing against yourself. So we'll answer that. But yeah, speaking to goldfishing specifically, that is an incredibly useful tool. Because, honestly, a lot of games of Flesh and Blood are just pattern recognition. You being able to recognize the highest value line as consistently as possible and with the highest level of efficacy. Talking about playing against yourself, I've only done that a few times. I did it back in Skirmish Season 1-ish, playing my Kano deck into Ira. The Ira deck was so simple at that time that it was easy enough for me to do. Outside of that, I don't do it just because I think it's a bit of a hassle, and I don't actually think it's worth it, per se. I don't know why. It doesn't click for me as much as just goldfishing. I think the goldfishing is absolutely enough. And for me, if I'm looking to get like a bunch of low-level games in just to get familiar with my deck, outside of goldfishing, I will just boot up Talishar and beat up on the bots there.
Yeah. Aren't you one of those bots that gets beat up? Anyway. So just to clarify, because Brendan said it a lot more articulately than I did, but goldfishing is just you have the deck in front of you and just play out turns. You just imagine something else might be happening on the other side. You don't actually play with another deck in front of you. And then playing against yourself is obviously playing both sides of the matchup. I do both. Don't goldfish as much, but I do. So during testing for Worlds, actually, there was like the Icelander versus Kano matchup. I was like, this matchup is quite in depth. There's a lot of stuff happening. I actually sat down I probably spent like 6 or 7 hours doing this, playing both sides of the matchup, like playing both decks in front of me. And the way I did this, I find quite easy is I have Tabletop Simulator. I just open that up on my computer in front of me, and then I have my deck in front of me, and I just, I've got my mouse here, and I can just play both sides of the matchup. One's digital, one's my physical deck. And I found that quite easy to do, and I learnt a lot doing that about that matchup. I feel like I literally learnt the insides and outs of both sides of the matchup from doing that, because I would sit there with a play and I'd go, okay, this is the natural line I would take, and then I would flick my eyes up, look at the Icelander hand, and go, this is what Icelander would do in this situation. Wow, this is actually really bad for me as Kano. Like, I need to, like Brendan said, pattern recognition as well starts to come into it of, I think I should be doing this in this matchup, or I shouldn't be doing this. And if you're playing both sides, Flesh and Blood is a game where you get so rewarded if you can play both sides of the table, if you can play your own game plan and understand what your opponent's trying to do. And I think actually one of the ways that you can do that and speed up the learning process of that is actually to play both sides of the matchup, which you can do with this kind of tactic like Doc Dunks is talking about. So I know this is something that Tarek Patel did a ton of before US Nationals, and as he started to get into the game, and he is also, I think, a big advocate of this. And it's a bit easier than some other TCGs to do this because the turns are structured, so it's not like there's not as much responding to things. There's a bit more phase play, and you're playing off 4-card hands, obviously. So yeah, I'm a bit, basically my answer is definitely 100% yes, but getting into it a bit more logistically, there's some ways you can do this. Decks that have really specific game plans, like you're a combo-esque deck or you're a super aggressive deck, I think goldfishing, to Brendan's point, we just play with nothing in front of you but the deck and just go through turns and look at 5-card hands and how you can put them together, is also really, really beneficial.
Yeah, just a funny anecdote on the end of this is that Sasha Markovic, who was in our testing group, he is the very extreme example of this. Like, so obviously he's kind of, I guess at this point, known for building combo decks. He won't play games. He won't play actual games. Like, even if he's weeks into his testing hole of trying to figure this deck out, we're like, hey, we should probably test the deck to make sure you're not wasting your time. He's like, no, absolutely not. He will just goldfish by himself for weeks on end, and then come to us with either garbage fire or a product that we can work with. But it's so funny because I don't think I ever will meet somebody ever again that behaves like that, because it's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's interesting. Felt table works just while we're putting out ways that you could, if you are looking to
it's so good.
take Dr. Unks's lead here, you can use Felt Table as well to do this exact same thing. You can also just play into like bots on Felt Table, which means you can just like, it's not perfect, right? The gameplay is not going to be great, but what it's pretty reasonable though. But what you can do is you can just get a million reps in basically gold. It's like goldfishing plus, I think. And then you have the next step up, which is playing both sides of a matchup, which I'm a big fan of. It's a bit faster than trying to go to an armory, play Ultim to learn how Ultim works. Why don't you just sit there and play both sides of a matchup if you're trying to learn and understand how something might work? But yeah, great question. I wanted to grab that question because I thought it was a fantastic question for where we are right now, heading into ProQuest Season 3, kicking off this weekend. And people looking at maybe honing some of their testing techniques, especially if maybe they don't have a wider group to test with or people that they can regularly test with. Maybe they've got sort of pockets of time. This is how you can use it. I know Editor Dave here often sits at his desk while like doing something and just goldfishes hands. He was doing Kano the other day and he messaged me about a few things. So that's how it works.
It's quite the rabbit hole, that one.
All right, let's get into the main topic of the pod, and we are talking about decks to play for ProQuest season. We are over this 3-week period. Last week we covered Icelander. Today we're covering Fi, covering some of the top decks for ProQuest season. Next week, Brendan, we don't know what deck we're going to touch on. We've been debating about what we think. We think Icelander and Fi are two of the decks we wanted to cover because we think Icelander, obviously coming off the back of the World Championships and just the sort of journey that deck has had and how it looks positioned for ProQuest Season 3 and the depth that we can talk about it is really interesting. Fi, I think we're going to get into it, but I think is one of the best pick up and play decks. It's one of the best proactive linear decks that you can decide to play for ProQuest, and we wanted to cover that. The third deck, not sure, so stay tuned. We will have something else that we're going to dive into next week, but wanted to kick it off, Brendan. Thought I'd share some history, delve back in time, and talk a little bit about where Fi has come from. Post Uprising release, we saw Fi basically pretty close to immediately dominate. It was the end of that first season where it released. These were the stubby hammerers. You remember these fondly, Brendan. Stubby hammerers, Maskly Pouncing Links, these like they're basically combo decks. Like some of the you could deal 40 plus damage on a turn easy with the Stubby Hammers as well. Ended up Sebastian Grondor and Sander Berg winning the Euro Players Championships and the Calling Utrecht, which those happened the same weekend. On this an iteration of these 5 Stubby Hammers Pouncing Links decks. And then basically immediately Stubby Hammers getting banned. If people recall, Stubby Hammers was actually banned in Blitz prior to Uprising's release. Alice just got ahead of that and said, we're banning Stubby Hammers before we even get into the season, because they obviously knew how powerful that was going to be. So yeah, Fire wins both of these events, swiftly gets hit with a ban hammer in terms of Stubby Hammers getting banned. We see, basically that's the end of the road to national season as well. And then Fire, we enter towards Lille. And Fire is a contender. As soon as a contender, it starts to rise up. I think you remember this, Brendan, in the weeks leading up to Lille, Fire started to gain more and more traction as the aggro deck, plays well into Ultim. That was the discussion. Does Fire beat Ultim? Does Ultim beat Fire? And people were landing on...
It still is a freaking discussion. It's crazy, yeah.
But people were landing on Fire as opposed to maybe decks like Briar or Viscerai. In the end, Fire ends up being the 4th most played deck in Lille, behind both Briar and Viscerai and Prism as well. But still sees pretty good representation at that event. Doesn't do as well. The aggro decks that end up doing well are Briar and, we see Viscerai in top 8 as well with Pablo Pintor, but also Dash sort of takes its place a little bit. Dash winning the Calling in Singapore the week before. And then we head to the national season, basically, which is where Fire starts to gain back some traction. Interestingly, Prism hits Living Legend, and then Fire starts to gain back some traction. I think with the rise of Icelander, you'd say, Fire was seen as a way that could combat Icelander by going wide. You have Belittle package, you have access to these resources, you can deal with the taxation a little bit more, and we see Fire go into national season and do pretty well. It puts itself ahead of Briar and both Viscerai as the aggro deck of the format through that national season. We show up to Worlds. Fire is one of... I couldn't find the data on this, Brendan. I could not find the meta breakdown, but Fire was... You might remember, you were in the booth, but Fire was one of the most represented constructed decks. Was it the most played in the end?
Yes. I think, yes. Yes, it was.
Put you on the spot.
So, yeah, I remember a few things specifically. I remember the top 3 decks were pretty much what we expected, and they were extremely close. But I do believe Fire was the most played deck. Oldhim was up there. And then I can't remember if it was Icelander or not. But yeah, and then there was a bit of a drop-off for deck 4. There is a little bit of an addition to the Fire history on that. Yeah, Fire actually was funny is after Stubby Hammers was banned, people were looking kind of how to still compete with Fire because it was a significant piece. And yeah, it struggled into Icelander, and the Belittle package wasn't always just in the deck. And I feel like at this point, it kind of is, right? Everybody just runs this 5 Belittle, and then the blue Minnowisms to target, and that's for resource fixing. And that gave the deck huge edge against Icelander. Didn't necessarily make the matchup favorable quite yet, although that is up for debate at this point. But now it's pretty much stock standard in the Fire decks, and that was an evolution of the deck after Stubby Hammers was banned. And then I just want to say something about Stubby Hammers. Rest in peace, never come back. That stuff was broken, and I remember going through the mental anguish of trying to deal with that deck and its existence and what it was doing and the numbers that it was representing. And I just couldn't wrap my head around it. I was in like an existential just dread because it was freaking busted, and everybody was like, "You just play around it," and I'm like, "What?" I was like, "What?" It was Kano, but you just start with everything on the board. It's nuts. So good.
Stubby Hammers is one of those equipment that I'm a little bit mournful that we'll never see it at the moment in any constructed event ever again, between Blitz and Classic Constructed. It's like that hard and cross trap. I have nostalgic memories for these equipment now because of how you could build around them. I remember playing Stubby Hammers for the first time, actually with you, Brendan, when we were first working on a chain deck. Like as soon as Monarch released, I remember we had 9 Bounding Demigon. We had Stubby Hammers in the deck. Like it was this sort of how do we be as aggressive as possible? Sort of janking through some half-cut screenshots people put up for mods for Tabletop Simulator.
Oh my god, yeah.
It was a good time. So that is the history. Yeah, I mean, in post-World Championships, so in the end, 2 Fire decks make the top 8 of the World Championships with Rob Catton and Daniel Rakowski. And post this, the deck has stayed pretty consistently through this battle hardened and PTI season through December as one of the top decks, and comes into this battle hardened season as in a pretty good position. So we will talk more about that. I wanted to start, Brendan, like, why play Fi? Like you said so eloquently some of these things at the top of the show. So why don't you take us into why play Fi?
Yeah, strong linear game plan, which is a prerequisite to be considered a top tier aggro deck. So it does meet that. And if that's what you're looking for, Fi is a great option. To do that, you're going to be pretty much doing the same thing every game. Your opponent will likely have to react to you, and there's not a lot of nuance in terms of your like macro game plan. The micro, definitely very technical, but in terms of the macro, it's pretty straightforward unless you get into some oddball games, people are trying to fatigue you, etc., etc. It's quite consistent. The Fi deck does have some cards that it really wants to draw, but it doesn't feel quite on the level of Briar where you're just like, draw Channel Heroic, draw Channel Heroic, draw Channel Heroic. So it feels a bit more consistent than that. And because it's more resistant to the ice decks, which is also another perk, by the way, in this ProQuest season, due to the Belittle package and just the amount of blues that it runs, it does feel a bit better than some other aggro options, right? It feels like it's pretty dynamic into these ice decks, and you can play the game, right? If you play some of these other aggro decks, you will sometimes literally not be able to play the game against ice. I think that Fi is just so powerful in terms of its equipment as well. Like Mask of the Pouncing Lynx is amazingly good. I think that Searing Emberblade, coupled with Fi's hero ability, just super powerful, generating value turn over turn. And that's a big draw to Fi for me, is if you just look at the hero ability, is sort of +1 per turn. Plus, it's in addition to that, it's also turning on your other cards, right? It's turning on your Mask of Momentum, it's turning on your Salt of Wound. So it's better than Ira's ability in that sense. Yeah. Or it's somewhat on par / maybe a little bit better because it's turning on these other cards and unleashing your deck. So those are the reasons for me, just the few ones that come to mind of like why I would play Fi. I think that it's up there to be the number one aggro deck. And if you're looking to play that archetype, Fi should definitely be on your list of consideration.
Consistency is like one to go back to, because you talked about it as consistency versus Briar, and it's like, so Briar's turns with 3 to 4 cards often will deal more damage than Fi. But Briar suffers from, drawing all non-attack actions, having 3 attacks, but none of them have go again. Fi doesn't have this problem. It can chop and change the way it plays out. Its cards have natural go again. It's the consistency to play your turns out in the manner you want to, is you get that a lot more. And that also makes it a bit more straightforward to play. But, that's diving into beyond that. You go into, there is a lot more to the micro play, like you're saying, Brendan. Like the matchup against Icelander, I think is actually quite technical. There's some really interesting stuff in that matchup about how you utilize your arsenal. Often sitting a Belittle in Arsenal waiting for the turn where they flip the Channeling Frigid, or you have the setup card and you're trying to read what the Icelander is doing and wait for that Art of War until the perfect opportune time to push the damage and get that Mask of the Pouncing Lynx off. So it's, there's more than just the consistency. I think other things as well is that just on Pouncing Lynx and this combo potential that the deck has, it's an aggro deck that combines an outburst of combo-esque sort of damage. You can present pretty easily somewhere in the 8 to 16 damage a turn off your 2 to 3 to 5 card hands, and then all of a sudden you can push a 25 plus damage turn. And that, I think, is something that is so powerful when you talk about playing a linear deck that can do 2 different things. And Pouncing Lynx, honestly, that card is just so good. You basically start with equipment on the table that deals 5 damage. Like it's really good.
Yeah, definitely. Like from the other side of the board too, when like some of the a big motif, I guess, in the ProQuest season is the ice decks, right? They are seen as some of the more powerful decks. Like when you're playing an ice deck into Fi, it really feels like you only need to miss 1 turn cycle. Like just slip up once. It's just it feels like it's on a knife's edge. As soon as you mess up, that Fi hits you for like 20 damage because they have a somewhat replacement level. Their cards are a bit replacement level, right? Like they can pretty much do the same thing, right? Other than things like Art of War. But yeah, if you're playing the ice deck, you're constantly trying to not lose like the entire game. And yeah, I think that Fi is just super, super powerful in terms of how easily it can explode with things like Mask of the Pouncing Lynx.
Yep. The other piece is that, actually, let me ask you a question before we even dive into some of these other strengths. Mask of the Pouncing Lynx versus Mask of Momentum. Do you think that you should just be playing Mask of the Pouncing Lynx basically against anything that's not Dromai?
No. I do think that Mask of Momentum does have some utility, right? Like there. I think I was going to say this earlier, sort of in the section, but a lot of the Phi decks, or at least this is how they were pre-Worlds, is there was a bit of a dichotomy between the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx and the Mask of Momentum purists. There is a bit of a small thought group around what weapon you play. You play the Kadachis or you play the Searing Emberblade. Pretty much most people play Searing Emberblade at this point. But yeah, I mean, people usually feel very, very passionately about their Mask of the Pouncing Lynx joints or their Mask of Momentum, both offering just wildly different situations, right? Mask of the Pouncing Lynx being more raw damage, and obviously you can build your deck to have more attacks on the combo chains, things like Double Strike, and then Mask of Momentum, threatening those on triggers, drawing cards out of your opponent, forcing them to act. It's not just raw damage. I don't remember the exact matchups because I remember I was talking to Peter. I'm just going to say Peter B because his last name is a little bit hard to say, but out of Vegas, when he won the Dallas Battle Hardened Calling with his quote unquote combo Phi. It was like the new combo Phi at the time. And he was very much Mask of the Pouncing Lynx into everything. And he did play Mask of Momentum in the one, but I don't know, Hayden, because I don't know the deck well enough, but I would say that you have situations for both, and I would default to Mask of the Pouncing Lynx as sort of my go-to equipment where I would need a reason to play Momentum over that.
Yeah, what we saw during the last 2 seasons, so since Uprising's release, is people build in different ways to support either, this pure, and I think the most pure version you could say is a bit more like what Peter was doing, and people lean towards that for Worlds, which was for the most part, although actually Rob didn't in top 8, but people lean towards these Pouncing Lynx, just explosive decks, and I think that is a really good place to start. People have listened to Arsenal Pass before and have listened to watch some of our videos on deck techs and stuff before, decks we've come up with. We are really big on keep it simple. The core of the deck should do the one thing it can do the best, and you should build around that. So Mask of the Pouncing Lynx to me is that, right? The guarantee that every game your deck does the thing. It is a good aggro deck and then presents this big burst of damage. So I really feel like I would need an excuse to play Mask of Momentum, and I don't want to dilute my deck too much to support that. And I think some of the lists that we see out there, and we'll talk about deck lists specifically, can kind of get caught between that. A card that I think gets played a lot in probably the majority of lists, but I don't particularly like myself, is Flame Call Awakening. For that very reason, it's like, okay, Flame Call Awakening allows you to, go and push a big Lynx turn, or allows you to do this, but you draw a Phoenix Flame, and all of a sudden that advantage you've gained has been wiped out. So there's things like that. But yeah, my kind of go-to is Pouncing Lynx. My testing so far, playing a bit of Phi, and it's like a Pouncing Lynx. I need an excuse to not play that card, 100%. And for me, it's basically only Dromai, personally.
Yeah, Dromai. I would wonder if there would be considerations in like an aggro mirror where you really wanted to take your opponent off the 5-card hand, like a Briar or something like that. But I assume that you might lose equity just because Runeblade has such efficient armor, and you're just like, ugh. Your Mask of the Pouncing Lynx your Mask of Momentum break point is like just getting blocked by armor, and the game's like lasting 3 turns, so the armor's just like super effective.
I think that was the thought. So there was I want to say Sanderberg, I think he played Mask of Momentum, or maybe his finalist opponent played Mask of Momentum at that calling. And I think the thought process was, well, people are playing Blossom of Spring at that time. They were actually skimping on equipment. They were playing, that was Stubby Hammer's meta as well. So they actually couldn't defend that well. So that was kind of the thought process. Whereas I agree with you, a lot of aggro decks now have friggin' fridges. So it kind of diminishes. That's the other reason. Katsu has continually struggled as we've gone through Flesh and Blood and the cycle of the game, because more and more equipment have come out to just provide people with fridges, which is just so good against one of the best things that Ninja does, which is Mask of Momentum.
Yeah,
tough spot. Anyway, digress. Talk a little bit more about some of the strengths. I think one of the great things about Fire is you can play 2 and 3 card hands just as well as you can play 4 and 5 card hands. The common play line of play my 0 cost with Go Again, my Cinder, Braver Cinder Claw, pitch my blue, play my weapon, pay 1 and get back the Phoenix Flame. The classic limited line, as you'd know, Brennan, play that a lot unlimited. Present 7 damage off these 2 cards. That's very common. Plus you can scale that up really easily with Fire. Fire scales into 3, 4, 5 card hands really well, which is a big advantage. I think it's just the perfect go wide deck, and the deck for Art of War. I think if you're like, I want to play one of the most powerful cards in the game in Art of War, what deck do I want to play it in? I think it's got to be Fire right now. So it's a good. I put here it is a bit of the bread for the meat that is Art of War. If you want to play that card and get the most out of it.
Definitely, I think that my last point would be if you hate wizards, Fi's probably a pretty good pick for you. I mean, just Fi's access to blues is just sort of unparalleled in the other aggro decks that put out as much damage and go as wide as Fi does, because usually part of those decks deck building limitations is they have to cut down on blues. They need to have more red cards, they need more power cards, and just like this belittle package that fits so well into Fi, it just kind of cheats on that. And I think that it feels really good when you're playing Fi against some of those ice decks versus if you were on like a Briar or something.
Yep. I also think if you're looking for ProQuest, you're looking for a deck that's going to serve you well on ProQuest. I think at the level of ProQuest, Fire is just going to get you a lot of incremental advantage from your opponents not being able to read the combat chain. And it's not easy against Fire. And what I mean by that is that when you come in with a 4 or 5 card hand and you play your first attack on the combat chain, it has natural go again. It can't be affected by hypothermia. There's ways your opponent's trying to understand, okay, are they pouncing links in this turn? Are they just pushing big damage? What are they going to play next? Could they play a flame, engulfing flame wave, for instance, next, or might it be another 0 cost? It's really hard for the opponent to understand what the combat chain might look like, and especially against players that are a bit less experienced, potentially, what you might find at a ProQuest level. So I do think Fi gains a lot of advantage at a grassroots level as well, I think, in terms of what it offers you.
If I was a relatively new player, or even somewhat intermediate player, which I probably am at this point, going into the ProQuest season, I would definitely pick Fi for week 1.
But instead he's picking Icelander. No, I agree. Fi was, I think, top of or second on my list of decks I suggested for ProQuest in the video we put up this week. So what about matchups? Let's talk about matchups. What are the matchups you're looking to play into? What are your favorable matchups? Well, I mean, Brendan, I don't think you can go past Dromai. I think Dromai lives in a little bit of fear, having nightmares about Fi, and from my experience as well, as a Rhinar player, Brutes have a tough time into ninjas in general, and Fi specifically, definitely.
Yeah, I think you're going to be well-rounded against a diverse field as well, which it tends to be what week 1 can look like. That being said, I think that we should talk about the Icelander matchup, which we already kind of did, to be honest, since Icelander was our other marquee deck to talk about. The matchup, in my opinion, is Icelander favored, but slightly, and it does exist on that knife's edge. It's very delicate, and the Icelander can lose pretty much at any mistake, right? Just takes about 1, and there's no chance you're beating a lot of Fis. But there is a lot of people that think it's Fi favored, and I can see that as well. Fi having access to all, so many blues, having access to these belittles, just very resistant to some of the disruption that Icelander looks to bring to the table. So, the other top deck that we picked for this series, you're pretty much 50-50, if not slightly unfavored or slightly favored against it. And I think that's a great spot to be in.
I think it's a pretty classic 50-50, as 50-50 as Flesh and Blood gets, because there's always going to be someone maybe ever so slightly favored, be it because of the deck list they bought, the player they are, and their skill and knowledge, or, just the point that there is still variance in Flesh and Blood. So I do think that, the game does, it's really close to being a 50-50, and there's so many factors that can swap it, sort of maybe that 5 or 10%, but it is a very close matchup. And it's quite a technical matchup as well, actually, which I really enjoy. I don't personally enjoy playing Fi that much, especially not probably a lot of the lists that we're seeing out there at the moment. But I do enjoy playing Fi when I'm playing into Icelander. I have been playing the gauntlet side of that matchup for friends wanting to play Icelander this season, and I was really enjoying the kind of technicality of how to use the arsenal. And there is play lines where it's like, okay, I know how many belittles I have in my deck. The game actually goes a little bit longer than you think, and it's about how do I craft a Mask of the Pouncing Lynx turn? How do I best do this? How do I set that up? Which is really interesting, especially in more sort of base level decks that are really focused around the 0 and 1 costs, like we see majority of Fi decks doing, and would be what I recommend picking up as well. Other matchups into aggro decks, you're pretty solid into the majority of aggro decks. No, I'm not saying you're necessarily favored into all the aggro decks, but I do think you are somewhere again around that 50-50 kind of mark, and Fi can just do Fi things with Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. And yeah, a matchup like whether it be Viscerai, Briar, Dash, those matchups are all pretty close, and I think you can take Fi in and feel, pretty good going into those matchups. I don't think it's... I know a lot of people say, it's favored into Briar. Some people say it's 50-50. Some people say I'm favored into Viscerai. It's favored into Viscerai. It does sit somewhere around that 60-40 mark, I think, somewhere around there, 50-50, 60-40, which I think that's a good deck to have, I think, heading into a really wide meta, like you're saying.
Yeah, and definitely a great deck for a balanced and reliable pick for the first weekend.
Unless, and let's talk about some of Fire's weaknesses, what a hostile meta might look like, and this is interesting. So I don't know how many metas will look like this, but if you're expecting a lot of Lexi, Azalea, Bravo, and Dorinthia, maybe not the deck you want to pick up in the form of Fire. Those decks tend to be quite difficult matchups because of the on-hit effects, because of the ability to also present damage and progress the game, like all of those decks can do, and the fact that Fire doesn't defend that well, that takes advantage of that.
Yeah, I think Bravo on that list is probably the weakest. If Bravo's like very, very teched for Fi, then yeah, it's gonna be it's definitely Bravo favored. I would be surprised if Bravos could afford that many slots because a lot of those cards just are very narrow in the decks that they target, and they mostly just target Fi because they don't affect Briar the same way. But yeah, a meta that exists of mostly Rangers and Dorinthia is very unlikely to happen. So at least for the first weekend of ProQuest, if you do decide to bring Fi, I expect that you'll walk into a favorable metagame scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, favorable, or at least not a bad metagame to walk into. And I think that's Lexi is a pretty reasonable pick for this first weekend of ProQuest, as it could be a good meta pick in a lot of people's local metagames and stuff. But actually, you're one of the aggro decks that plays better into Lexi. And I'm not saying you're necessarily favored. I haven't played that matchup enough to probably understand, but you do have a lot more game than some of the aggro decks who just can't get through a lot of the resource turns or the resource hampering turns that Lexi can have, which is important. I think just in terms of like other weaknesses, like if you are trying to attack Fire, like if you are getting ready for ProQuest this weekend or next weekend, whatever it might be, and you're thinking about, okay, I've sorted my other matchups. Fire is still something that's on my radar. How do I get a few extra percentage points? How do I understand how to be better into Fire? I think you look at the weaknesses that Fire has, and if you can make the Fire defend, then you can get on the front foot. Like getting Fire on the back foot is one of the best positions you can put Fire into as the opponent, because you force him to start to have to defend with cards that defend under 8. There's a lot of 2 blocks in that deck, and if you can get them away, take them off a Pouncing Link's turn, or they finally draw into Art of War and they have to defend on that turn, you can really push your advantage, and that is what you need to do if you want to beat Fire.
Yeah, and on the ice deck side, it's just disruption at the right time, which is tough. I mean, it feels like for Icelander, by far the most important thing in that matchup is to draw CLF at an appropriate time and likely draw multiple throughout the game.
Yep, don't disagree. In terms of anything else, just onto the effects. If you're thinking, okay, what's my way? Maybe I'm playing a Rune Blade. Is there... I'm not sure how good these are, but Consuming Volition was always a card that came to mind. I haven't revisited it recently, how good that is into Fire. But on-hit effects, they can have a lot of value into Fire particularly. So I do think it's worth looking at. That's why I do think... I know you talked about Bravo before. I think there's also different ways to build Bravo. There's cards that people aren't playing, cards like Debilitate right now that I think are reasonable into Fire. Of course, you talked about... You were referring to Chokeslam, I guess, as well, which is one there, as well as Crush the Weak.
Chokeslam, Crush the Weak. Like if a Bravo's packing 6 3 Chokeslam, 3 Crush the Weak red, then
Spinal
you
Crush.
can... Yeah. I mean, then you could say that they came to that tournament with your name on their list if you're playing Fly.
Yeah, which I think people probably will this coming weekend. Me and Brennan, I think we differ on this, but I think Bravo is slowly sliding into one of the top 3 decks in this format for me, which is... I mean, not personally. I'm not a big fan of playing Bravo, but I can't deny that I think Bravo is pretty well positioned for ProQuest, it seems. So I don't know. Let's look back in 3 weeks' time, Brendan, and see what the meta shakes out like and what the winning decks shake out like. But yeah, Bravo feels like a great deck to lock a top 8 away with. I just don't know if it's the right deck to win a ProQuest with. But maybe that's a fallacy. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm excited to play against it.
Okay, let's move on. One thing I did want to talk about in terms of weakness of Fire, or maybe a reason you don't want to play Fire, is what I call the aggro mirror problem. I know me and you have, I was going to say talk about it, we've whinged about it quite a bit, especially around the Leal meta. Aggro mirrors, some people enjoy them, and there's what there's, and some aggro mirrors are also quite technical and quite interesting. I remember the chain mirror back in the day, quite an interesting mirror match because of the carrying husk dance, and there has been other the lightning briar mirror. I enjoyed that because there was a lot of around how you swing tempo, how you use your plunder runs, how you set up your embodiments of the earth, etc. I think current aggro mirrors don't feel anywhere near as technical as that from my perspective. That's my personal opinion. Agree or disagree? I know, Brennan, you agree. And I think Fi, if you're going to play Fi, it is one of the aggro decks in this current format where I think there is less play in the aggro mirrors than some of the other aggro decks. So that is a problem I see, and something that makes it maybe a little bit less enjoyable, but that might not be a consideration for you.
Yeah. I
was trying to be delicate.
The reason it's the reason that I'm not even considering that deck at all. It's literally just because of that, which is not the best stance in terms of like, if you just want to win, Fi is the best deck, even by a few percent, you should probably take it. But I would not even consider playing that deck after my experience at Pro Tour level. Like, it was freaking miserable. And I'm done with those days.
Yeah, someone's going to clip that, so just be clear. Brendan didn't say Fi is the best deck. He said if you feel it is the best deck, or it looks the best deck for your meta. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what Fi could or should look like in this meta, because there is differing styles going around. So if you're looking on YouTube, or actually just in the description of the podcast, you can see we've posted 2 deck lists here that we're going to kind of look at a little bit. One of them, they're both from Top 8 at Worlds. One of them is Rob Catton's deck, and the other is Daniel Rakowski's, and they do differ. So Daniel's deck it's a bit more typical of what you would have seen of Fi decks throughout the last 2 seasons. It is really focused with, it's got 3 Out of War, it's got multiple Salt the Wounds, it's got a lot of red line attacks that cost 0 and 1, plus a good number of blues available to it. On the flip side, you look at Rob's deck, and he's got a lot of things that feel a bit more tech cards. He's got 3 Ancestral Empowerment for I assume for Mask Momentum matchups. He's got Engulfing Flame Wave in his deck. He's got access to, I think, defense reactions, and Take the Tempo, which weren't in Daniel's list. So I think those are all quite interesting, and it makes the list differ quite a lot. Like the play patterns when you have a card like Engulfing Flame Wave, that card costs 2. That's very different to playing out your 0 cost, then your 1 cost plus your weapon, and then going and getting your Phoenix Flame for free. Now all of a sudden you have a 2 cost. You now have to pitch 2 cards if you want to Flame Wave and weapon. So the deck looks a bit different potentially.
Yeah, I think that the differences between these decks are pretty fascinating. You're like, Catton's 3 Ancestral Empowerment is like kind of the biggest thing that stands out. I know Daniel has a cheeky one of Razor or something like that, but Catton really kind of leaning into that. What I can assume is the Mask Momentum sort of synergy there. Also, Catton Assault the Wound, although he does have 2 Double Strike, it's just, and we have quite a difference in terms of tech cards as well, with number of rounds on me, number of that all you got. I mean, it just shows you that there's the sync below is definitely. It just shows you there's kind of a lot of ways to build this when you're looking for your last 5 or 6 cards, and I think you will be able to sort of express your individuality as a player through deck building with Fi, even though it seems to be a very streamlined linear aggro deck, right? Yep. There are a lot of options for those last few slots, and that's what we see in the difference between Daniel's deck and Rob's deck.
The biggest one for me, and I alluded to this earlier in the show, is that Rob did not play Flamecall Awakening, and only played 1 Phoenix Flame. So rather than treating it like a deck where you play the 3 Phoenix Flame, you play Flamecall Awakening to go and find those to give you these power advantages, the way Rob looked at this was Phoenix Flame is the worst card in my deck. If I draw it, sucks. Card is terrible. So let's do away with the card that maybe benefits from having those, to just not have those cards in the deck, and just use the hero ability, like Brendan was saying at the top of the show, just +1 each turn. That's how, and +1 chain link. So, no Salt the Wound for that very reason. The deck might have a little bit of a lower ceiling, but the consistency and the draws seem to be more in Rob's favor. And I think that's basically what he's gone for, as opposed to something like Daniel's list. And that could be playstyle dependent as well. I think you could look at that as a playstyle thing. Obviously, it looks like Rob's backing into opportunities to play Mask Momentum a lot more. But also it could be meta call dependent. What are you expecting to face? And I want to be careful, because I haven't played anywhere near as much Fire as either of these players have played, and I haven't played both of their decks through the gauntlet to understand where exactly all the weaknesses and benefits are to potentially playing the different lists. But what I will say outside of playstyle and what you prefer is that in consistency versus power is I think if you are looking for a deck that goes into a unknown meta, a bit of a wider meta, I would probably favor a style like Daniel's that can get the most out of pouncing links, has a bit of a higher ceiling, and does the thing, asks the question, which we always say, it's the most proactive linear style of this. Whereas I think Rob's is a bit more understanding of the meta, having a bit more play dependent is kind of how I see it. So although I really like Rob's list, I like not having Flamecall Awakening because I really don't like that card. I like the consistency element of it a bit more.
Yeah. I do have a question for you. What matchup is Daniel playing Crown of Providence?
That's a great question. Is there a Crown of Providence in his list?
Yeah, there's a Crown of Providence in the list.
No, there's not.
The one I'm looking at is Daniel Wachowski World Championship. I guess I'm looking on February. It's I'm looking at from the tournament, so it could be incorrect. But there was a Crown of Providence.
Okay, I'm looking on the fabtcg.com, which notoriously always correct. Obviously, I'm not sure if he played Crown of Providence. I couldn't tell you why. I don't know what matchup that would be for. So let's just.
I would say it's more likely potentially an issue then. Anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, I think two different ways you can set up, and there's also other ways outside of that. And I want to talk about some of the cards you could look at, and options for maybe evolving some of these lists. So Engulfing Flamewave, really interesting card. That on-hit effect for mirrors for aggro matchups is a really interesting consideration. Also, you talked about the Dash versus Icelander matchup, and I know you want to talk more about Icelander if you could, but one of the things you said was the opponent starts the turn with a Red Throttle. Engulfing Flamewave does a pretty good impersonation. Like your opponent, so if you start the turn with that red Engulfing Flamewave, all of a sudden your opponent has to go, okay, well, I've got my Channel Link Frigid here, I'm ready to flip it over and tax them. But then I still have to deal with this 5 damage coming at me before even the taxation starts to hit my opponent. And now you've got that to think about. So I do think going taller is a good way to play into Icelander. And not only does this go tall, but it has a great on-hit effect and also can still enable really strong go-wide turns. So I think that's why you look at a card like Engulfing Flamewave. A card that I've started to see come into lists is Soaring Strike. You can't go wrong with Leg Tap. Leg Tap that's draconic, that's going to help you go wide, plus also have a bit more damage on it, as opposed to being... So especially these decks are a little bit less focused on Pouncing Link's maximum ceiling and are a bit more comfortable with playing 3 card hands. I think Soaring Strike is a fantastic card. Let's use this as an example. You have a blue, a Soaring Strike, and a 0 cost in your hand. You pitch that blue, you play that Soaring Strike, you come in with your weapon, you play your 0 cost, and you get your Phoenix Flame back for free. All of a sudden, you're looking at 11 damage off your 3 cards there. That is a good rate of return for consistent turn-to-turn play. So I do like cards like Soaring Strike. A card that, interestingly, I saw Daniel Rakowski playing in the Fad Team Cup. He was playing Exude Confidence. He finally got his revenge on Michael Hamilton. They played Icelander versus Fire matchup, and Daniel had cards like Soaring Strike, Exude Confidence in his deck, and Exude Confidence did quite a bit of work, actually, in that matchup, which was interesting.
Well, one card from Dynasty. The Blazon...
Blazon Yori, yeah.
Yeah, has that been making into lists? Surely, right?
I don't know. I feel like I haven't seen it, but I would have thought... So I think the reason it probably hasn't been is because it actually isn't very good against Dash. A lot of people are like, great card against Dash. It's only relevant against Dash on a maximum velocity turn, because in general, they're not going past Chainlink 3. And if they are, they're probably going to do it wisely by making the later Chainlinks the lower power cards. So that's when you come in with the T-Bone yellow. That's when you come in with all this, and then you can just you don't have to, or you come with your pistol on those chain links, or you break the chain. Actually,
I just think it'd be great in the mirror, really, because it just hits so many things. I mean, if your Lava Burst is turned on, this is hitting it.
Yeah, so Lava Burst is the main one, but also you can break the chain. Like, I think Blazon Yori, while it looks really strong, you can just break the chain. So you could say, let's say you go, okay, you go your 0 cost for 3, or the line I just talked about, you go your 1 for 4, then your 0 for 3, and then your weapon, and then you get back the Phoenix Flame. Your opponent's not going to block that, right? And then say you have another 0 for 3 or 1 for 4 in your hand. Break the chain and then play it, because you no longer need the chain links to matter. So, Blazon Yori, I think, is an interesting card. We haven't seen it as much. If you know that you're playing a bunch of mirrors, I guess the question is, like, is it better than Flamescale Furnace? I'm not sure.
I would think so in the mirror, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, those are the cards I would look at. I really think that there's this kind of waypoint between what Rob was doing and what Daniel was doing as well, just to kind of go back to that with deck lists. Again, not a FI expert myself, but the way I've looked at this, I'm really interested about some of the cards like Soaring Strike Red. I think in the meta we're in now, trading damage is really good, and especially if other FI decks are going to go towards cards like Engulfing Flamewave, etc., that's more interesting to me. And then making my blues probably block for 3 is the other kind of transition I like as well. I know I looked at Pablo's list as a list that I've been playing and testing quite a bit. He played a lot less block 3 blues, and that's some of the changes I've sort of felt is you lose a little bit on the consistency side because you lose some of the draconic chain starters, but you get to have these cards that defend for 3, and you can deal with cards like Engulfing Flamewave. You can be a bit better into decks like Bravo, etc. So all meta dependent, I think, is the be all end all of that. Some good takeaways. Hopefully, some good takeaways. Why don't we? Well, actually, you put a note here, Brendan. You said, "Is Pouncing Tiger Fire a thing?"
The answer is no, but it's a good question to ask. With the addition of Dynasty and like pretty much every Ninja card in Dynasty being geared towards a Pouncing Tiger archetype, I don't think it'll make it in.
I don't think so either, but it could be a thing. It could be a thing. Tips for playing Fire. Want to round out the kind of end of the podcast, talk about some things that maybe we've learned playing some Fire and testing over the year that has been over 2022, or just some things that we've noticed and I think are worth passing on. The first thing is, keep fundamental understandings of what 2 and 3 card hands look like as well. So I just talked about that. 2 card hand would look like a 0 cost red attack that has go again, natural go again, a chain starter, your blue pitch, so that you can make that 7 damage attack. And then 3 card hands will look like that 11 damage that we just talked about, which I think is really important. That's why I like Soaring Strike again. I think it's a card that can come into it as you play more 3 card hands. And then 4 and 5 card hands, those are when you're really starting to threaten your masks. Those are your little turns potentially. Those are your Art of War turns. Flame, Call Awakening, if you're playing that card, those are those turns as well. I do want to say, if you are looking at a card like Soaring Strike and you're looking at maybe going to a more consistent build, Flame, Call Awakening would be the card that I'd probably replace Soaring Strike for. Take out for Soaring Strike, rather. You're an aggro deck with a combo punch, and I think it's really important that you play in that manner and you understand when you're playing Fire at your ProQuest or whatever it is, that your first goal is to be proactive, to force your opponent to the back foot so that they can't get on the front foot and attack you and force you to defend. And you want to look at how you're going to craft this Lynx turn. It should always be in your mind, what does my best Lynx turn potentially look like into this matchup? Now, some matchups are going to look really different. Icelander, they're going to be able to tax you. You might just, as long as you can get 4 damage out of your Lynx, you might be really happy. In an aggro matchup with a lot less defending and a lot less on-hit effects and impacts, is 4 damage enough out of your Pouncing Lynx? Probably not. You probably want to be looking 5, 6 upwards. So I think, remember, you're an aggro deck that has this combo punch, and that combo punch and its impact on the game is going to depend on the matchup that you're playing into.
Definitely. It's pretty simple, but I think that playing your Art of Wars effectively and not getting blown out during those, especially if you're against a reactive deck, something like an ice deck, is critical, right? If you get hosed on an Art of War turn that you've potentially taken a lot of damage for, or just been trying to set up for, and maybe played like an inefficient line the turn before to get the Art of War in Arsenal, if you get Channel like Frigid or something on like that, when you could have avoided it, sometimes you can't. I think that those are some of the key moments of the game where you're going to win or lose, especially against a deck like Icelander or even Oldhim.
Yep. If you are playing as Icelander, I think just start with your attack. Always start with the attack. Force them to have damage in front of them before they make the decision about what they want to do. That's why I don't love Rise from the Ashes in the matchup as much, because you have to start with a non-attack action first, and your opponent gets to make some decisions. They have some more information. And then just beyond that as well, belittle turns. The last sort of tip I wanted to give is, if you're playing belittle and Art of War turns, play your belittle first. Like if you've got the tunic, sorry. This is what I want to say. If you're on this tunic belittle Art of War turn, play the belittle off the tunic, go and get the blue minimalism, and then pitch the minimalism to pay for the Art of War is generally the way you should play it, get the most damage out of it. And you can do that during the reaction step, play the Art of War. So most people know that, but if you don't. The last thing I want to say is just don't over sideboard. Especially if your deck is a Pouncing Lynx deck and you do have this, you want to reach your ceilings. If you start to over sideboard by defense reactions, I think they're the worst things that Fire can play, to be honest. I really, really dislike the defense reactions. Now, I understand playing some Sink Below into the Bravo matchup. You're going to be put on the back foot at some point. That is Bravo's game plan. It's not like you're always going to be able to stay on the front foot. So I understand Sink Below. That all you got, I get why people play it, because in theory, you just get to break a chain link or save some damage and cycle it, but that card can be super punishing if you take tempo and then draw it on the next turn. And beyond that, any other defense reactions I think are also just kind of out of the question for me. You shouldn't be diluting your deck that much. As soon as you draw 2 defense reactions in a hand, you could just be in a world of hurt. They could be replacing a blue, they could be replacing a draconic chain starter. You're just reducing the consistency that your deck has by adding these cards in. So be really careful when it comes to sideboarding. Same thing with just adding cards that, like Command and Conquers, Erase Faces, etc. Again, those aren't cards that go to your natural competency of playing these 3 to 4, 5 card hands. Generally, they're more for disruptive elements. So just be careful when sideboarding with those.
Well, I think to sort of sum it all up and tie it off with a bow here or whatever, if you're coming into weekend 1 and you want a deck that's easier to pick up, doesn't mean it's easy to play. The ceiling on it will still be high, but easy enough to play to cheek some wins, right? And is relatively stable into an unknown meta. I think that Fi is a great pick. It doesn't really have any abysmal matchups, and the ones that might fall into that category likely won't be showing up. If Bravo is extremely popular, then yeah, maybe Fi is not the pick. But that's also something that we can reevaluate after we get the data on ProQuest Season 1. Mm-hmm. One thing to keep in mind for ProQuest Season is that usually, if it's going to be the same as in the past, we will get data week to week, and that is the best leading indicator you should use to sort of predict the meta and likely pick your deck if you are looking at multiple decks to potentially play.
I'd say use your local meta as well. You say you've got a ProQuest every week for the 3 weekends. Go to ProQuest 1 and don't focus on the games that you played. Focus on what's actually at the event and what is rising to the top tables. I think that is the best way to look at the meta in association with the data that LSS put out. Because your look at the end of the day, the data that LSS put out are great, but that's not the data for your local meta, and that could be different. You often see these smaller kind of climates within, these microclimates within different regions for the game. As Brendan loves to tell us, whether it be Prism or
freaking Prism infestation down here, dude.
Hey, you look at the Pro Tours, Prism showed up. Anyway, that is Fi. I agree with all the things Brendan said. Fi is one of the best decks in this format. I just think there's no bones about it. Like, it just is one of the best decks in this format. It is up there with Icelander and maybe even Bravo at this point as well. So I know you're gonna scoff, but just wait and see.
Oh my god! Did you say up there with Bravo? Like, wow. Bravo is just clearly up there. And it's like, yeah, maybe Fi can compete with the
other way around. Maybe Bravo is up there with Fi.
I'm a Bravo hater.
Are you? Gentlemen. Is it because you've anyway?
No, I picked it up for that battle hardening, and I felt like I did pretty well. I played my first match with an IP penalty, and I got comboed by a Icelander, and then I lost the other match to Brody, who was on prior, my winning in for top 8. Yeah. And all the other matches, I was absolutely eating Fis for breakfast. So it felt great. It was just, if I was going to go into a Guardian matchup against like an Oldhim or just like any other normal deck, I was like, I would just rather be playing Oldhim, I think. And even in the Fi matchup, I feel like you don't lose much equity and card selection when you swap over to Oldhim, who has access to Stalagmite and Oldhim's ability, Crown of Seeds, stuff like that. So that's really my thesis on it, but I could be wrong. Bravo does feel very good to play, so I would not be surprised if it does have any legs in this meta that people pick it up, because it's fun. It can make the opponent miserable, and it's relatively straightforward. So yeah, I mean, it's not a terrible deck, but I'll hate on it.
Play a little game, maybe stack our reputations on it, for fun things like that. ProQuest Season 1 kicks off in the next day or two when this pod drops. Give me, fast forward 3 weeks, all the data comes out. First of all, give me the deck that wins the most ProQuest, and then give me the top 4 decks played over the season.
Yeah. Deck that wins the most ProQuest is Fi. The top 4 played across all of them is tough because I feel like the top 3 is easier to pick. But we'll just go with what we kind of know. I'd say Icelander will be in the top played. Oldhim will be up there. Fi will be up there. And then
I need
the last slot.
I need them in order.
Oh, okay. So I would go number 1, Fi.
Yeah.
Number 1 is Fi, most played. Number 2, it's probably another aggro deck. That's the thing.
Dash my.
I'm just gonna. Yeah, those are. So I'll just go old. Okay, Fi, Oldhim, Icelander, Briar. But I very much think it could also be Fi, Briar, Oldhim, Icelander. Like Icelanders, who knows? But yeah, so Fi, Oldhim, Icelander, Briar for me.
Okay, I think for me, deck that's going to win the most ProQuests is going to be. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Icelander wins the most ProQuests this season.
No way, dude.
Man,
That deck does not convert. That's Prism 2.0, dude. It gets wrecked on the ProQuest scene.
Prism won the most ProQuests in ProQuest Season 2. I'll just remind you.
Okay, I'm talking Road to National season back when Chain was around.
ProQuest Season 1 as well. I'm going to go top 4 most played decks. I'm going to say in this order, it's going to be Fi, Dash, Icelander, Bravo, in that order. I'm going to say that.
Okay.
I think Briar's not
Yeah, I mean,
top
maybe
4.
Bravo's up there. Yeah.
We'll see. I think even Ultimate might see more play than Briar, but we'll see. Anyway, that's going to do our little predictions. You can fast forward if you or rewind, whatever it is. I'm lost. 3 weeks' time, we'll see who's right. That is episode 92 of Arsenal Fast. That is our second of 2 of the 3 sort of premier decks for ProQuest season that we're covering in depth. You can go check out Icelander episode last week. You can go check out the video where I talked through 7 decks in total, actually. A bit of a little short video there. Twitter, we're both there. Brendan is at BrendanAPG. I'm at Fian_Dale. Come and check us out. Get involved in Fab Twitter. We have a bunch of videos that have already gone up and are going up on the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel. Go and throw us your support there. As Brendan says, karate chop the subscribe button. I don't know about that, but you can click it. You can click the like button, drop us a comment, let us know what you like about the videos we're putting out, and check out the gameplay that's going up very, very soon. Big thank you to all of the Arsenal Pass patrons. Remember, you can get access to all of our content this month for just being at the $4 tier. And with that, Brendan, I'm out of breath, and we will see you next week.
See y'all.